absolutely love it when buttons don't work. So today's session is around the idea of user stories. Depending on the level of knowledge that folks have, we'll see which exercises we do and what we don't. I have some things that I've prepared. Anna knows that they're always fun, even if they are sometimes a bit basic, but it's getting everybody discussing, which is the important part. But the first thing I have here is just a fast pass, a little introductory exercise. I can see we've got 5 participants now. That's pretty good. A few more will drop in. It's 5:30. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a little assignment to rooms. And I'm going to do 2 rooms. There we go. So I'm going to assign you into breakout rooms. And on the mural, if I summon everybody, I don't think everybody's there yet, but on the mural, you should be able to see like 5 hexagons with numbers in the corner. If you go to the hexagon which matches your room number. So if you've not used Microsoft Teams breakout rooms before, at the top of the window for the breakout rooms, it says the name of the room, and it's just room 1, room 2, room 3, right? It's not super complicated. And I'd like you to, tell you what, I probably need to lock all of these things. That would be a good idea. There we go. Yeah, that's always has a... I found out, Anna, a really cool tool for Mural. So, you know how sometimes when you're dragging around and you end up dragging an object that you didn't want to, or dragging a post-it around? If you hold down space, it lets you drag without moving anything, without interacting with the surface. So that's that. I learned that today. I think I knew it before, but I had to look up the keyboard command again. So we're going to do this icebreaker. So there's 7 questions, that kind of 7 numbered questions in each room. So I'm going to click to open the mural. It is too late to go back now. Open the mural, open the breakout rooms. It's too late to go back, so they will just open. So make sure that you access the mural in the chat. Yes, there we go. Welcome. More victims. Nelly and Mandar? Oh, and Erica. Hey, how you doing?
Hello. How are you?
I'm doing good. We just started some initial exercises, so I'm going to pop you into a breakout room. Do you have a copy of the mural?
Uh,
Awesome.
sorry.
Yeah, perfect. I'm going to put it in the chat for those that might not have experienced it. Nayeli and Mandar, are you able to hear me okay? Perfect. Do you have access to the mural?
Yes.
Yeah, I put a link in the chat and it should be on the community page as well. But I'm going to pop you into a breakout room with Erica, and it'll be breakout room 3. So on the icebreaker on the mural, Erica will know where that is. We can do that. Okay. So 3, Mandor 3, and hell yeah, 3. There we go. Perfect. So I've turned on the breakout room. Oh, it's not opened yet. That's okay. Right, so now I can open it. There we go. I've clicked the open button. So you guys should head into a breakout room where you can start answering those questions. I'll put 8 minutes on the timer because we've had a few minutes. There we go. Perfect. Okay. So everybody's out in the breakout rooms. Awesome. I can see people wandering around and creating... Well, nobody's creating post-its yet, but that's part of the fun. They maybe haven't had a lot of experience with Mural. I can do this ask to be followed. It's a balance on whether you send people out right away or you have a little bit more time to explain Mural. Unfortunately for these small workshops, it takes away a lot of the time for a live virtual class, we'd probably spend, I guess, 15, 20 minutes just on here's how all of the tools work and what we're going to do and how we're going to interact with it. But that's great for 15 minutes out of a 2-day class, but not great for 15 minutes out of a 90 minutes. Yeah. So how is everybody today? So it's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people. We've got 8 people. That's pretty good. So they're just off in their breakout looking at these questions and answers. I can see the mouse pointers moving around for those that are here. I asked to be followed so that they went to that place, and hopefully they zoomed in. I use Mural for all of these sessions, and I'm talking to myself, but I'm talking to you if you're watching online, either live or before. Anybody watching live? Nope, just me saying we will be starting soon. I don't know if there's is there a way for me to see how many people are actually watching? I think I can look here. Let's see. How many of you are actually here? Home, channels, spinning. Nobody! Awesome! Oh, no, it's refreshing again. I don't know that it can tell on LinkedIn. So if you're watching on LinkedIn or YouTube, but it should be streaming on LinkedIn, Facebook. But there's none on Facebook, none on YouTube at the moment, but that's okay. That's okay. The purpose of this is for the people that turn up, not for you guys. Oh, look, I'm being a bit... This is why I've ordered a new computer. I have ordered an Alienware Aurora 13 because I hate having lack of processor capability. So I'm just checking if there's anything I can close, and I can definitely close Outlook. Let's get rid of that malarkey. And do I have a browser window here? I do. Let me kill that. That's 4 browser tabs gone. There we go. Too many devices. Too many devices. Not enough processing power. So they've got a... I'm probably going to close the room. Oh, it looks like is Sean on his own. That's the downside of... Oh no, maybe they are in the meeting. Are you in the meeting? I'm going to close the rooms and expire the timer. Bring everybody back. Time's up. Let me close that. And I'm going to have a look at... What were my questions? What are requirements? What are not requirements? I think at least one of... Yes, Anna?
Nothing. We were just discussing.
I think at least one of you gets stuck in a room with somebody who left. That always sucks. Was that you, Sean? Maybe he's gone off to make a cup of tea because he was in a room with nobody. That is okay. We will progress forward anyway. So I am interested in some of the ideas that you talked about. So there are a number of questions there in the mural around what are requirements, what they're not. But it really all comes round to that idea in the middle of what are your biggest questions about user stories. Because those answers will help me figure out what we're going to do for the rest of the time. Anna, what are your biggest questions around user stories?
I am all good with the questions. I just don't know what are not requirements. I have no idea here. All other questions are fine.
What
I
are
need some
not
explanation.
requirements? Yeah. Right?
Because for requirements, you may have also what needs to be done, the functional, the non-functional requirements, but what's not requirements, I don't know, honestly.
So, yeah, that's a good question. I will come back to that. Erica, did you generate any questions?
Oh,
Okay. First of all, I don't know. That in general, not talking about only requirements, but when I start working on a project and then going into the more details with user stories, the main part of the questions are about the value. What are the value in whatever we are doing or we are trying uh, to to put in the project. So apply to the user stories, what is the value related to what we are asking for? And I don't know, in my opinion, requirements are, you can have a lot of different requirements, functional requirements, but not only functional requirements. It has to be um, transforming something provable, I'd say. So whenever we have something that can be shown, can be analyzed, can be I don't know, related to some retrospective or to some feedback is a requirement for me.
Okay.
So we can regard usability, functions, but everything has to have a value, because you don't have a value related to it, you don't need it. So you don't need that requirement. So it's not a requirement for the project.
Okay.
It's my
No. That's definitely interesting. Sean?
For me, it's one of the benefits of user story.
Okay. Benefits of user stories. Okay. Naili? If I'm saying your name wrong, just beat me up. That's the best way.
Well, I am like more concerned from like in the beginning, like how can you start defining your user story?
Yep.
And like how do you set like the criteria acceptance? How do you know what to include on each one?
Yeah. That's going to be interesting. So like what to yeah, how do you start and what to include?
Yeah.
How do you start and what to include?
So sometimes there's a different kind of process, and I've been in some teams that they want to add like all the process in one only user story, so that confused me.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, you want to stick everything in a user story so it becomes this massive document
Mhm.
of yeah. It's too big.
Yeah.
Too big. Yeah. How do you know when to break down a user story? That might be an interesting question as well.
Yeah.
So morning, Eri. How you doing? Well, morning might be for you.
It's my daughter's team's name. It's Junlong.
Oh,
But yeah, I was using my work computer last time, but this time I'm just using my daughter one. Even though she is only 7, but from her school, there are still teams that
yeah.
she's
My daughter uses they have half their lessons in Teams and half their lessons were in Google Classroom, and the teachers booked lessons over the top of each other because the calendars weren't in sync. So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So I have a few answers here over on the right hand side. So I'm just gonna summon. I think I already did. I'll summon everybody on the mural. Are you on the mural? Hold on. I'm gonna need a post-it because I'm gonna keep calling you Eri if I don't have a
No,
post-it.
it's Junlong.
Yep.
I put my name in the chat, and I know it's hard to pronounce, but in fact, if you try it, it's not hard.
No, you long.
Anyways,
Luckily,
and yeah, you don't use it that to me. Yeah,
perfect.
it's very cool. Yeah,
I've now got a little post-it down here with Julong written on it. That'll help me out there. I do that all the time for my classes now because sometimes people have spellings that I can't understand or just names I can't pronounce. So you asked the question, Anna, or you were concerned with the question, what are not requirements? And I have some things that I don't think are requirements here. A solution design is not a requirement. Right? If you're defining the solution, you've gone way beyond, like, what do I need? A decision about implementation, I guess that kind of goes with a solution design, right? It's not a decision about implementation. It probably isn't a definition of what you're going to get. Right? I think that's the hardest truth for organizations to handle, but it is a reality. It's not a source of truth for what the software does. They're not really requirements. If they were requirements, we would have to do them all. But most of the time, we don't have to do them all. Right? Things change over the life of the project. Some of the things we do, and we don't need other things. So they couldn't have been required then if we don't build them. So an expression that my good friend David Starr likes to use is that they are desirements. Stuff we want the product to do that it doesn't do yet. And sometimes we don't always get what we want. Right? That's why I like desirement. That's a little bit better. Yeah, wishes. What we wish. Yeah, I like wishes.
First, like, what we need to have before starting with the user story. Maybe we need to have a decision how we're gonna do this requirement, this ticket, or something like that before we start working. And also, or how do you see this?
Could you repeat that? Sorry.
The first two tickets. It's like more. We need to have that information before starting with the implementation of the requirement.
Yeah. So we want to leave this. One of the purposes of user stories, right? That was one of the other questions. Was like, why do we want to use user stories? It's because we want to leave the implementation till as late as possible, so that we reserve the right to change our mind. If we have the implementation defined in the requirement, in the thing that we're being asked to do, that almost always locks us into one solution that might not be the right solution. When we get into actually doing it, maybe it's the wrong solution. So there are lots of things that I might whiteboard as part of my discussion in the team, right? My refinement, looking forward into the future, what's coming up next on my product backlog. We're going to have a bunch of discussions around what these things are, what it might look like, right? But we're trying to concern ourselves with what we want to deliver rather than spend too much time on how, right? So I think one of the mistakes that teams make is they don't necessarily reflect on how much detail should be in the how. There's a lot more detail in the how than people think there is in the how.
True.
Right? Every time a developer has to make a choice between A and B, it's usually a business decision choice that the business doesn't make. The developer makes because it's too late to go speak to the business now. And that's one of the reasons we have acceptance criteria in our user stories, as almost a codification of our conversations that we have. Right? We look at the story, it's not enough information to actually build it. Right? But it's enough information to start asking questions and poking at things. But then as we get the answers, I've sat with a team once where they were asking questions of the product owner, and the product owner was giving answers and nobody was writing them down. Right? And I'm like, what's going to happen at the end of this sprint? The product owner is going to say, I said that it should be like this, and you're going to have forgotten 10 minutes after the refinement session.
We're solving this by recording the session.
Yep, recording the session is a good way, right?
Yeah.
I resolved it with that team by I kept poking them and saying, no, you need to write it down, and they would go, yeah, we will. And I'm like, no, write it down now, because you'll forget later, or you'll write it differently later. You won't get a chance to write it down and then think, oh, and have another question. Right? So writing that down, recording that information is really important. And one of the ideas of a user story is that it's a card, right? The traditional user story in the physical world, right, that we don't often work in anymore, but in the physical world was a 4x3 or 6x4 card, physical card, and on the front you write what it is you want, and you have to use like a Sharpie, right? So you can't write really small. And then on the back, you start writing down the answers to those questions that you ask as you start having a conversation about it. If you run out of space on the card, it's time for 2 cards. Right? It's time for 2 cards. But in the digital space, we've got an infinite amount of card on every card. So sometimes it's very easy to see too many things listed. So when I do exercises with teams on breaking down backlog items, I'm looking at what they're creating, and if there's more than 4 acceptance criteria, I might start giving them a poke and saying, should this be 2 things?
Depends on the estimation with story points. It's like it's bigger than 8, then yeah, you should consider making 2.
If you're doing story points. Story points are definitely a complementary practice, and some people love them and some people absolutely hate them and don't feel they have value. I'm a little bit in between. I've used both ways. Story points, I tend to track towards more of a Kanban strategy these days, but lots of people do still use story points. And yeah, but it's a little bit arbitrary, isn't it? It might be an 8 for your team, but it might be a 22 or 21 for Erica's team. That's too big to do inside of a sprint.
In my experience, story points never work. I don't know if I've been unlucky till now, but it never works with story points. So we make, or the development team make an evaluation and makes an evaluation, and especially at the beginning of the project, the I don't know, the solution for success, for being successful from the beginning, is being clear, as you said, Martin. I don't know. And most of the time, the problem is the lack of communication between the customer and the developer.
Yep.
So we speak different languages actually. So I'm sure I've been clear, and the other 2, but so I can make a wonderful evaluation in story points, whatever. But actually, it's something different from what we both were talking about, and it's easier in managing an agile project. It's easier, but at the beginning of a project, in my experience, that there's always been a mess with new people not used to working with agile. So story points, I don't know, only if the team is used to working very good together, is a very let's say very I don't know the English word, but if they work, if they've been working a lot for a lot of time, both the customer and the development team, the whole agile team, it could work. But otherwise, story points are not very.
So I think Definitely, it sounds like you've been unlucky, Erica, but it also sounds like Anna's maybe been lucky, right? That they've been. That's okay. The way I tend to look at story points is, for me, there's very little value in the numbers. That's not why I want to do story points with a team. Relative estimation. I want them to have conversations, and I want to encourage them to have conversations. And one of the ways we have a conversation is we need to identify, what do I know that you don't, right? And doing that planning poker exercise, where one team member says, "Oh, that's a 2, that's super easy," right? And another team member says, "That's a 21, that's super hard." Well, okay, we've got somebody knows something that somebody else doesn't. Let's have some conversations around how do we create a cohesive understanding across the team. And that's something that in Scrum, at least, the product owner is accountable. Everybody's understanding of the product backlog items and what they mean is within the accountability of the product owner. So it's in their interests to generate as much of those conversations as we need to. We're never going to get the exact same story from each other of what we think something is and what it actually is, right? Because we all understand language and ideas differently. That's part of the value of working in a team, is bringing those different perspectives. But we can at least get to some level of agreement on what it is we're looking at. How big is that thing? That for me is the value in story points. But lots of people use the numbers later for their velocity and various things. That's cool. I prefer the Kanban metrics, but I do work with teams that use velocity. Just don't do what one of my teams did, which is sign a contract with the customer where velocity was specified in the contract and they had to be within 15% of their expected. Don't get me started on mental things people put in contracts. Predicting the future, isn't it? So that's why I have this idea of what are not requirements, and a desirement being an unenforceable formal expression of hope that the software will do something, right? I think the feedback loops in agility, that one of the purpose of the feedback loops, specifically around the sprint review, is to do that diff between what did we create and where does the product need to go next, right? Because maybe we created something that wasn't what the users wanted, but was a better way, right, than what they expected to get, or maybe it wasn't, right? Maybe it was exactly what they wanted and it still wasn't a good way to build the solution, right? Just because we build what customers ask for doesn't mean we're doing the right thing, right? I think one of the other trainers had that expression day before yesterday, I think. You know, the fallacy that we are doing the right thing if we build what our customers ask us to build, right? That's just not true. We should be building what our customers need. What is the value, right? And how do we identify value? Value is even harder to identify and work with than size, right? How big are these things? That's easier than what are these things worth to us? And user stories are trying to condense it down into something simple enough and small enough that it's easier to answer those questions. That it's easier to answer the question how big it is and what it's worth. Yeah. So I like the story around what is a user story, a card, a conversation, and confirmation. Right? Upon what basis are we going to say that this story is complete? But also, what does it look like and what is it? We have to have those conversations. Oh, I have a PSU issue on my computer, and one of the screens keeps going blank and then coming back. That's what happens when Dell ships machines with graphics cards that are too powerful but not good enough power supplies. Dell, looking at you. So what sort of techniques do you use to write your requirements? How do you make them transparent to your team? Where do you put them?
We are using Jira, so just to put the description in the description section to describe what that story is talking about, and everyone will understand. And during the planning, we will ask each team member where you need to improve and to clarify it, so everyone can have the ability to take that story. So that's what my team is doing.
Yeah, Jira's a really common tool in the market. It's one of the two big ones, and it's huge. Usually it's driven by the business because they have a lot of business support and business tools in the Jira space as well. I do see it a lot in organizations. Anything else?
UML also.
UML? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we use Jira in my company. It's a very powerful tool, but I personally don't really like it. It's useful to record everything about the projects, but if you for the daily routine, the daily work is not user friendly, I'd say. So paper, PowerPoint for the daily work. I mean,
Yep.
I find it more useful. Yes, you need something to record everything, especially if you have a big project. But Jira is the last thing we update, or if it's a huge project with a lot of people called agile but not really agile, so I find it's a more useful tool for waterfall projects. So if it's a small project, Jira just I don't know the essential, but it's not the daily work. It's not for the daily work, in my personal opinion. Depending on the size of the team, UML for complex new projects is very useful because it's very it's not a tool. It's a methodology. It's very useful to complex new projects. Otherwise, even the PowerPoint it works.
So
If it works for the team, if you don't have paper, because we are going paperless for the pandemic.
yeah.
The
What Jira
things are
Jira was originally released in 2002. So the chances of the teams that built Jira being agile teams at that time is very low for the size of organization. So most likely, just like TFS, Team Foundation Server, and other tools out there, they're waterfall teams building a waterfall product to support other waterfall teams because that's their biggest customer base at the time. And then they're bolting on a bunch of capabilities to help agile teams. I do know some teams that use Trello and are super happy with it. Again, just do it simply. And in fact, Erica, I've been toying around with some teams of, instead of, if you ask anybody in the agile space what tool should you use, all they'll do is hold up one of these post-its in a whiteboard, right? Cards, stick them to the wall, right? But we're kind of a little bit beyond that now. While pre-COVID, we maybe could have had that. Today, it's just not going to happen, and that's not going to change going forward into the future. So I actually built a board the other day for a team in a backlog, just in Mural. Right, so they just have them as cards on the Mural, and they can move them around. They can delete them. They can create new ones. They can put them anywhere they want. There's no bounds. There's no controls over that, which is like having a whiteboard on the wall. Right? That sometimes apart from the fact that Mural can integrate with Jira, let's not go there. Right? That to me is not
Yeah.
a selling point. Well, it can integrate with GitHub issues as well. I wonder how that actually works. Let's not go there.
Also, the planner, for example, the Teams planner, which is very basic, but we used it too. It's no, we didn't have for project access to Mural. We used it, and it worked as well. So,
Yeah, sometimes just using, you might think, well, there's going to be a lot of manual work, but the reality is that it just makes things easier because you can do whatever you want. You're not controlled by the tool. And that's sometimes the problem with the bigger, more complicated tools, is you're more controlled by the tool than you control it, especially in the enterprise situation where your organization controls the configuration of your tool. So when I run with teams, I'm usually using Azure DevOps. That's kind of my preferred tool if I'm online for other reasons. Microsoft's MVP being one of them. But I usually give everybody on the team admin. I make the group that is for team members, that team members get added to. I put it in the administrators group for that project because I don't want them not to be able to do something if they need to be able to do it. Right? Everybody should be able to collaborate together. Yes, Geelong.
I have a question regarding if you like for example 3 development teams and they are with one business team, they are going to work together. And for sure the business team they don't know the DevOps, right? So
Um,
in that situation, yeah.
so I just so I do I have a little engagement model where I do just 1 hour of consulting for customers, and I had somebody, they can just book it on my website, right? And this guy booked it, and I was interested in what he was doing. They're using Azure DevOps for their entire business team, and there's no development, there's no software engineering going on at all in this company. So they've got Azure DevOps with just the work item tracking. They've got everything else turned off, and they're using that with the business teams. And they moved to that from Jira because it's less complicated, right? There's
So
less
that's
baggage.
so DevOps could be used for those business
I'm not saying,
teams.
I'm definitely not going to say it's a good idea for your teams, right? Because I don't know your context.
Just trying to learn new things.
Yeah. So they were using it very successfully, and the teams were super happy. The people that were using it, the managers and leaders in the organization that were using it, were super happy because it sometimes you don't want too many options, right? And sometimes I feel like, and I am definitely biased against Jira. Okay, so take it as how it sounds, but
I'm not I'm not unhappy at all. When Erica said that, I mean, I was just laughed because you guys are not the first one to see that. Every time I said that, everyone just like idealist just to give me this look. So why you're still using that Jira? So because from a top level
yeah.
management, they push us to use that. We have no control, so they are not expertise. We have to listen to them. So I don't have the control about that. So when Erica said that, okay, I understand, but that's the reality. I have to take it. So
Well, that's the nice thing about some of these other tools, because you can integrate with the data without, pull the data out that you need, just work with it locally and then have it pushed back. That would be nice.
yeah. Jira is like SAP. You cannot work without it, but you can you don't have to like it at all.
I
It's a
I
it's a
that is going to really get a lot of people's backs up, saying Jira is like SAP. I'm not going to sit here and disagree with you, but I think it's not quite as bad as SAP.
because it's younger.
Well, yeah, but probably that is actually probably true. You're probably right, because it's younger, right? Usually the younger, the newer the software, the easier and simpler it is to use, and the more it targets your specific use case. And I think there's definitely a trend towards smaller tools that integrate with each other rather than bigger tool vendors that get bogged down in. As soon as one of these folks get an enterprise customer, as soon as they get an enterprise customer, you suddenly see all these features for enterprise users that the rest of us couldn't care less about, right? That bog us down, that add functionality or add constraints. One of my biggest complaints in Microsoft Teams, right, is that companies can lock down the way that their team members can use it. So people come into my class, and I teach all of my classes in Microsoft Teams, and they're like, I didn't know it could do this, and I didn't know it could do that, and how come I can use this feature? Right? And that's because you're in my Teams, and I just turn everything on. I've got one customer, it does make sense, but they're the Royal Air Force in the UK, so it's the military. And if everybody in a Teams meeting is from their company, right, is their accounts, then cameras are allowed. As soon as one person joins the meeting that is not from the Royal Air Force, all the cameras turn off. And they're not able to turn them back on. It's automatic. Right? So that's a security feature, but obviously somebody's asked for it, and I bet there's a company out there that has chosen to implement that feature that doesn't need it. Right? I can understand why a military would need it if you're using webcams in the office, right? There might be something on the wall that you don't want people to see, but, you know, an oil and gas company doing it doesn't necessarily make the same level of sense. So one of the things that I think are really important in user stories, and I think this is definitely an important caveat when we talk about user stories, is that user stories were developed, and it's going to be a little bit weird way to say it, by telling stories about how users interact with your system. If users are not interacting with your system, user stories are probably not the best solution to your problem. Okay.
Sorry, say that again.
If you are not describing users accessing your system, then probably using user stories is not a good idea. Right? If you're describing how APIs interact because you're building an API that some development team hooks onto, I don't expect to see user stories in your backlog. That is not going to be conducive to writing things in a way that everybody can understand it. Right? That's why, how many times is user story mentioned in the Scrum Guide? Does anybody know?
No.
It's 0.
0.
User stories are not mentioned in the Scrum Guide. Story points are not mentioned in the Scrum Guide. These things are not mandatory to be doing agile practices. They're just things that have worked for other people and they've talked about. Right? And they may work for us and they may not within our circumstance. User stories have a particular use case, which is describing interactions. So here I've got a user interface. I'll just summon everybody to it. Sean, do you have a question?
In the Scrum Guide, you mentioned this user story.
Yep.
I was looking at it and I saw there is a thing which says the acceptance criteria is optional in Scrum. Will you agree with that?
I just want to check what it says, because sometimes we can definitely read the Scrum Guide in a way that that triggers our cognitive bias, right? We think it says something, so hold on.
It's not mentioned in the Scrum Guide, but I read somewhere that acceptance criteria is optional.
Acceptance criteria are definitely not mentioned in the Scrum Guide, and they're not mentioned in the Scrum Guide because they have nothing to do with Scrum. You don't need to have acceptance criteria to be doing Scrum. You don't need to have user stories. typically, acceptance criteria generally are paired with user stories, but not exclusively, right? Having acceptance criteria, a way of writing down and noting the conversations that we've had. Oh, awesome, we've got another visitor, another helper. Having those...
Sorry.
I couldn't hear. I couldn't hear. So having those conversations. So I do not believe that acceptance criteria are mandatory for anybody. If you think they're a good idea and you think they add value to your team and add understanding, use them. If they don't. Okay?
Normally relate the acceptance criteria to the definition of done. How wrong am I?
Very wrong. Definitely very wrong. So that is a common conflation between those two things. So acceptance criteria are to do with the requirements, right? Acceptance criteria go on the requirements. Definition of done is about the quality of what it is you're creating. So regardless of what it is that we deliver, it all must meet the same quality level. But that's a really common one. I actually spent probably an hour and a half today talking about that with product owners. And if you want to dive a little bit more detail, there's a recording of, was it the definition of done workshop, Anna? So there should be a recording on my YouTube channel with a definition of done workshop, and we talked at length about that specific scenario, and we did some exercises around creating a bakery, right? So we had Erica's Bakery, and at Erica's Bakery we had some products that we're creating, and then we had a definition of done and how we kept them separate. So I would go watch that. It will hopefully...
We had 1 hour session offline.
Just on that, yeah. It's one of those things. There are so many things that I'm always surprised at the number of Scrum trainers out there who have never read the Scrum Guide, right? And get some of those things mixed up. So it's not surprising everybody else does. That's okay, right? But we just need to figure out how do we put those things together. I spend more time talking about what's not in the Scrum Guide than what is most of the time, right? No, you don't have to do it that way, but the Scrum Guide says we should. No, it doesn't. Go look, right? So I've got a little picture here of a recipe website, right? I stole this from a good friend, David Starr, again. I think he did it at a conference. But I have a recipe box, and there's a list of recipes, and you can enter ingredients. Sorry, that's a recipe, and you can add ingredients to the recipe, and then you can add some notes for cooking, right? So it's fairly straightforward. But if we were to start creating user stories, one of the best places to start is to draw the user interface that you're going to talk about. Draw it on the whiteboard, right? What is this thing we're creating? What does it look like? And then you need to start having conversations about it, right? What are the things that we expect users to do with this? So where's my user stories? There we go. I have a couple of user stories down here. So here's my 3 user stories that I've created. As a recipe seeker, I want to search by tag values so I can find recipes ad hoc. As a recipe recorder, I want to tag my recipes so I can find them via ad hoc tags. And as a recipe seeker, I want to search by recipe ingredient so that I can find recipes for the ingredients I have. Right? So those are a bunch of different scenarios, right? It's definitely a limited... I can come up with about 10 more for that scenario, for that page, but there's a limited set of scenarios. But did you notice that it doesn't say as a user? In these scenarios, it gives the user purpose as a recipe seeker, a recipe recorder. There's two different personas there, two different mission statements that user has. And on the left-hand side, I've got recipe recorder, chef, recipe seeker, cook with existing ingredients, right? Might be a scenario. Be as specific as you can. And I see in some organizations, they might name a specific person if they're a known person within the organization, right? The CTO wants something that they interact with, or the CFO wants something. In other groups, Microsoft used to have, back in their waterfall days, they used to have posters up on the wall in the offices with who the target users were for some of their products. So you literally had a poster that had a picture of somebody, and it said their name, Ellen. I think Ellen the something tester, right? So this was for Microsoft Test Tools, and it had a little story about Ellen and who she was and what she was trying to do with the product, so that the developers could connect empathetically to that story and get themselves into the mindset of Ellen and what she's trying to achieve. So when I'm building features, I'm thinking about, what does Ellen need? And this is the same here. What does a recipe recorder? Okay, so I'm in the mindset of I'm adding stuff to this system. What do I need to be able to do? Or recipe seeker, I'm looking for stuff, right? You're adding context there. So not just the user. That would be a very cheap way to do it. So you've got, as a user, some type specific, I want, what is it? What's the user's goal? Right? And then why do they want to achieve that goal? Because that might add some additional context to your story. Yeah, so that's the typical makeup of some user stories there. Is that how you've seen them used, or have you seen them differently? Anna, is this what your user stories look like?
Some of them,
Some of them, right?
not all. I also like in the user story to have like the business purpose, like why we are doing this. And maybe
Linking to some greater purpose. Yep.
yeah, like what do we want to achieve with this?
Yep.
And then maybe it's nice to have this, the who, the what, the why.
Yep.
And after that, the acceptance criteria, but there is no people to write that. That's the problem.
Yeah. So this is not the whole thing, but this is the user's story bit of the user story, right? When we think of user story as the thing, we might have more stuff associated with it. Like each if we were putting these each in Jira, right? Or Jira, depending if you're in the US or Europe, right? Then perhaps this image that we have of the user interface that we're creating it for is attached to those items to give them context, right? Oh, well, I've got this specific thing. Okay, but what's the context within which it's working? Well, this is the user interface we're trying to create, or this is the business proposition that we're trying to fulfill. That's okay. We can have that additional information. That's going to add value, right? But the idea behind user stories is keeping it really simple and concise, so that it encourages you to create more of them, right? Lots of discrete elements that are very independent. We didn't talk about it, but we usually try and encourage, it's not perfect, the invest model. If you're not familiar with the invest model, your things on your backlog could be independent, negotiable, testable, valuable, estimatable, and small. I think I did that in the wrong order, but there we go. I can't spell either, so that solves that problem. So they need to be small enough that we can do them, small enough that we can estimate them, right? Do we understand it enough to estimate it? Can we test it? If we can't test it, it's going to be very difficult to validate that we completed it or not. Is it negotiable? None of these things are set in stone. Nothing on your backlog is set in stone. It's about the future. It's a description of the future we would like. Right? But maybe the future we get needs to be different from what we would like to have. And needs to be independent, so we minimize dependencies. So if you do have dependencies, maybe it needs broken down into smaller things. Right? And then the last one was valuable. If it's not valuable, don't build it. Right? So understanding value is super important. But what does value mean to your product owner, to your business? That's something that, for example, Scrum is not going to tell you. It's just not going to give you that answer. There's lots of different ways to determine value. But it's going to be unique to your business. What does it mean to your business? Right?
Well, I've heard about that from Mike Collins' book, Applied User Story. I think that one originated from it's called Invest, right?
Yeah, Invest. It's for the an acronym that the letters spell. I have a different view of that here. Let me grab this because I was good. I had it all set out to do a little workshop if we had lots of people turn up, but sometimes nobody loves my workshops. Okay, so yeah, this is the way you would look at it: independent, negotiable, valuable, estimatable, small, and invest. Right, and the idea is it's simple to understand. And there's other options, right? I'm gonna give you two other options that you can use, Julong. NASA has their model, right? Their model is complete, consistent, correct, modifiable, ranked, traceable, unambiguous, and verifiable. But try explaining that to your mum. That's going to be difficult, isn't it? Right?
Yes, no one like it.
Another one is the IEEE requirements. IEEE. Interfaces, functional capability, performance levels, data structures and elements, safety, reliability, security, privacy, quality, constraints, and limitations. Also super easy to understand. Not. Right? We're not dealing with engineers all the time. The engineers are not the only ones that have to understand the things on your backlog, right? The stakeholders need to be able to understand it. The way I normally explain it is anybody who understands your product domain, your business domain, should be able to understand your backlog. If your business domain is building APIs, right? I would expect that level of complexity in your backlog. If your business domain is building user interfaces, right, that your average person can use, then I would expect that level of understanding to be required to read them, right? Because our stakeholders should be able to understand what it is we're creating, because we might be spending some of their money, right? You don't want to bamboozle them with lack of understanding. So that's just part of a user story. Do I have the other thing that I wanted? It's maybe not in here. Let me pop over here. Yeah. So we start off with our user stories. So there's the 3 user stories that we had, and then we start to have conversations. Right? So if you think about this user interface here that I have, you know, when I click on the homepage link, what happens? Right? Can we sort the columns on this data grid? Right, is that a thing we're going to do? If we don't enter any ingredients, can you click the add button? If so, what happens? Right? These are all business decisions. They're not actually technical decisions. The business should decide that, yes, the add button should be disabled if there's no text in there. Or does the add button enabled and we click it and it does a model dialog that says, you have not entered anything, click OK. right? Because that would be really annoying. Yeah, but we've all used interfaces like that, haven't we? That do things in a way that you're like, why would you do it that way? Often it's because nobody thought about it and the person doing the work made the choice. Because nobody told them what the answer might be. They don't have any way to ask. User stories are trying to create that conversation so we start engaging with our stakeholders, engaging with our business, engaging with our product owners, right? What happens when you click the cancel button and you've got stuff filled out? I've clicked cancel buttons in apps and it disappears and I'm like, oh, really? You didn't ask me if I wanted to lose that information? Right? Simple stuff like that. What happens? Right? So here's one of those specific items. As a recipe recorder, I want to tag my recipes so I can find them via ad hoc tags. Right? So then we've got some questions specific to this item. Does this happen when I'm entering the recipe? Like, where the heck am I doing these tags? What about really, really big tags? What's the maximum length of a tag? What about short ones? Can I have a one-letter tag? Is that okay? Right? What about spaces? How are we going to handle spaces in this tagging system? Right? These are all questions that engineers will ask if you let them. Right? Sometimes you need to wind them up to get them started, but you'll get these sorts of questions once you get people going in these events. So then we could just write the answers, the questions and the answers on the story, but maybe these are a little bit too ambiguous for our engineers, because we all know how engineers love specificity, right? I can see Julong's an engineer. We like things to be Boolean propositions. I'm either doing it right or I'm not, right? And if you're a product owner, you will get often maybe incredibly annoyed and frustrated with your engineers for being pedantic. They're not being pedantic. They just want to know the answer, right? Do you want it this way or that way? Should it be a red button or a green button? Because that might be important to you. Right? Left-hand side of the page or right-hand side of the page? Just put it somewhere. Right? But we're asking those questions because they're choices we have to make when we're building the product. So here is two of those answers written as scenarios. Scenarios are a good way to write acceptance criteria that helps us be a little bit more specific on what it is we mean when it happens and how it happens. So here we've got the 3-character minimum. Given a tag value of less than 3 characters, when it is entered, then it is not saved and the user is alerted about the tag length. There's quite a lot of information in there, isn't there? Quite a lot of answers. Right? That's describing how it works, describing the behavior of the product. These are business cases. Given a yes.
This is also kind of related with the tester and the test cases.
So, okay. So one of the problems that we run into is that we end up testing quality in rather than building it in. User stories and scenarios are about let's figure out up front what the product is supposed to do. Because what typically happens, right? I'll give you a typical thing, is the developers go off and decide what they think the product should do. The testers go off and decide what they think the product should do. And then the testers run their tests against what the developers have done. What typically happens?
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't match up. So this technique is around test first. Yes, maybe you should have testers involved in these conversations, and they're going to ask other conversations that a software engineer might not make.
Yes.
Yeah, we're going to build these things together. Acceptance criteria, right? For me, I guess being the Julong and I being the pedantic ones, right? That acceptance criteria is the criteria by which you will agree that we've built what you asked for. Acceptance criteria. On what basis will you accept this? So if we can wiggle that acceptance, one of my favorite acceptance criteria is from an exercise that I run for teams, and it says be generally attractive for a website. What the hell does that mean? Right? Be generally attractive. Well, what's attractive for you? What's attractive for me? They're different things, right? I've built some god awful websites that I could say, well, okay, I could agree it's generally attractive, right? It's not as ugly as it could be.
So what's the difference between acceptance criteria and scenario?
The way you write it.
To have-
Just the way you write it. So an acceptance criteria I would normally see written as just bullet point statements.
Yeah, checkpoint.
Yeah, bullet point statements or checkpoints, right? Scenarios are, let's take that bullet point statement and write it in a way that we're specifically saying what behavior we want to see. So one of the advantages of scenarios is there are a bunch of tools out there that can turn these into tests automatically. Not completely automatically, we still have some work to do. But there's SpecFlow I've used in the .NET world where you can write it like this and it generates the stubs for unit tests that then developers fill out the tests, and if they pass, it does that. Right, so there are tooling around that, but even just having it written like this, Julong was looking at this going, yeah, that's how I want it written, so that I know what I need to build. Because again, these are business decisions. If you don't do that, then who's going to decide what happens when you enter a tag of less than 3 characters but hit the save button anyway? Julong and I are going to decide. We're going to build it however we think it should look.
But are these two scenarios also could be considered as two acceptance criteria?
Yeah, I would say that's we're using a technique for writing acceptance criteria called scenarios. That's the way I would look at it. Right? So we can take our what's that one? Yeah. Okay. So we take our user interface, we draw it, and then we start creating user stories, and for each user story we start creating scenarios. What happens if you had 10 scenarios on a user story? You'd be thinking that's too big, right? That sounds like this is a really complicated thing. Maybe I want to break it down into 2 user stories. Maybe it's fine the way it is, but it enables you to start building that out. So the exercise that I do with teams to help them with this is I go through some kind of exercise like this where we talk about invest and we talk about scenarios and how you would write them, right? And then I get them to draw a user interface that already exists in their product. So just draw something that already exists in your product. Build the user stories and scenarios you would have liked to have to build it correctly. So you're using hindsight. You already know what you had to do. And you have everybody together that you need. So product management, developers, testers, who do you need to tell that story? Build out the user stories and scenarios, and if you're running that with your team, you can go around and you can poke at something and say, you know, is that the right user there? Or there's quite a lot of scenarios on that. Is this quite big? How big do you think this is? Well, it's ginormous. Okay, do you want to break it down into multiple user stories then? You can encourage them to do that. And then they end up with, here's the level of detail that would have built the right thing that you ended up with. Right? Yes.
So based on what you said, I mean, it could be considered as an epic, and then it could be divided, right?
Yeah, but it's just a picture. Yeah, it's just a picture, and then you're breaking it down. But then the second part of the exercise. So once you've done that, and they've, I guess in Britain you'd say ummed and ahed. They've kind of they've thought about how much detail's involved in this, and they're like, yeah, this is the right level of detail. This would have answered all of those questions. So you get them to kind of review it and talk about it. You send them off for lunch, right? And then when they come back, because it's lunchtime already, right? When they come back, you get them to take a user interface off their product backlog, something that doesn't exist yet in your product, and you say, right, let's build some user stories. Let's break this down. Let's create something that we can understand what this thing is, that we've made the business decisions that we need to make. And they'll be surprised at how difficult it is, how much they don't know about the things on their backlog. And then at the end, once they've built all of that and they see how much is there, you're like, awesome, this is how refinement works, right? This is exactly the type of level of detail you want to be coming out of refinement with to add to your backlog so that the teams can take it and go build it. And it's a lot more work than people think it is. Right? They think that you can just write something down, give it to developers, and they go build something, but that never results in the right thing. We've got to have more conversations and user stories. A statement, card, a conversation, and confirmation is how we start down that journey. Right? If you think about the evolution of a user story, you might put stuff on your backlog that's really far down with just a title, like a little placeholder. What's this thing? It's attached to Anna's business case, right? And you go, oh, here's all the things. We don't really know what they are yet, but here's all the things. And then as they get closer to being done, the product owner goes in and goes, right, this is what that user story is, and this is what this other one is. Maybe gets the team together and whiteboards out the UI, so we attach the UI to it. We've built out some user stories, and then as it gets closer to the top of the backlog, closer to being ready, right? We then go in and we start talking about scenarios and build out the scenarios, turning any acceptance criteria into scenarios, having more conversations about it till that thing is ready. And then we can walk into sprint planning and we know what that thing is. We understand what the business problem is we're trying to solve, how complex it is, how many bells and whistles we need to have on it. And then we, as the engineers, the team taking it on, can then just worry about the implementation problem. They're not doing the implementation and deciding all of the business choices. Let's just do the business problem, and then we can figure out if we built the right thing afterwards.
Yeah, but I also think that we should be careful and maybe have the input from developers, because it might, the user story, be kind of big with a lot of scenarios, but to be easy to develop. Like,
Yep.
maybe we'll spend more time in writing it down instead of developing.
So definitely a thing you have to figure out based on, and this would be based on your team, the product owner, the business, the context, is how much detail do we need in our product backlog, right? And the Scrum answer is as much as you need and no more. Because if you do too much, like Anna's saying, it's waste, right? You spent all this time on something that's very straightforward. Right, so trying to find that balance.
Yeah, I think you understand that with, well, I don't know, by experience.
Yeah.
If you have some experience both on the business side and development side, it's easier because you know what the main problems are of both sides.
Yep.
At the beginning, it will be complicated, but and mockup definitely works when drawing something and making a stretch to make everybody understand. For example, if it's something very new, because it's easy to understand for the business side, and well, the developers know the tricky parts, and well, it's up to the team then to avoid discussing about that, because it could be a strategy if the development team is trying to sell something to the customer, but if in theory it's not the case if you're in a Scrum team. So
Yeah, and yeah, I agree. It comes with experience. Sometimes you'll do too much work and go, oh, that was actually super easy. When we get something like that next time, we'll not bother doing all that work.
yeah,
So there's going to be a little bit of waste at the smart start, but it's not really waste, it's learning, right? We're learning that experience. But always be careful about the written word. And I have a little example here just to drive that home. A little statement here that you might have seen on any menu. I, as an engineer, don't know what that means. I'll tell you why. Because it could mean this. Or it could be this. Couldn't it? Right? The written word sucks for specificity. I may or may not get bread with my choice, depending on which one it is. Right?
yeah,
So take that into account. Right? My favorite engineering joke, Julong, is I want you to go to the local shop, and I'd like you to buy a loaf of bread, and if they have eggs, buy 6. Julong's laughing because he's going to come back with 6 loaves of bread if they've got eggs, right? Because that's an exact interpretation of what was said. And one of the reasons that a lot of engineers gravitated towards coding is because they have that mindset for direct interpretation rather than, oh, but I said it this way, why didn't the computer do it? Well, it's because you didn't actually say it that way, you said it this other way because of the specificity. So sometimes we want lots of specificity, and sometimes it's okay for things to be vague, but finding out where that balance is for your team, for your context, will be different, and figuring it out is, I think, part of the fun of building products, right? It keeps it different every time you're doing something, and that feeling of figuring it out is part of what makes a team, gives them empathy with each other, and builds that amazing presence. So,
and then there are also the unwritten user stories. For example, about the performance. If somebody from the business works for the first time on a project, we would probably never ask about performance, which is
Yep.
crucial. So either the development team, the development experts ask you about the performance, or they decide. Maybe they want to decide because the performance is normally one of the most complicated parts, especially if the project is huge. So the business has to know that it has to ask about performance, or just talk about performance.
Yeah, well, that's definitely one of those things that the business very rarely asks about until they get it and performance sucks. And by that time, it can often be too late to fix some of the performance issues because they're endemic to the way the product's been architected, and it's a big deal to change it. Yeah, absolutely. And that for me is where conversations around definition of done come in, right? So we have a conversation around what's the minimum level of quality we need, and one of the questions on that is testing. How much functional testing do we need? This much. What about performance testing? Oh, okay, every page must respond within, 500 milliseconds. Okay, now we have a performance metric to how many users do we have to support? Oh, as many as we like. Well, we can't do that, right? We can't do as many as you like. You have to pick a number and we're going to measure based on that. Okay, 200 simultaneous users. Awesome. Now I've got 200 simultaneous users, 500 milliseconds. I can put that on my definition of done and run it as part of everything we do. And then we'll always have that. Yeah. You got to ask those questions. I actually worked on a team where our performance test was everybody in the room opening the web page and then somebody shouted go, right, to refresh or run the report and see how many people it could run at once. Yeah, no automation whatsoever. So that you want to be able to build all of those things into the solution, but if you don't have the conversation, you won't ask about it.
Yeah, I think that's why I related the definition of that to the acceptance requirements. For me, the acceptance requirements has a lot to do with quality. With
Yep.
What now I understand your point. It's I completely agree with you, but I think that the acceptance criteria always have to be something to do with the quality, because without the quality, it's very difficult
Go-
to start working.
Go watch the definition of done workshop, because we specifically talk about why having acceptance criteria on the definition of done is a bad idea. It sounds like it would be a good idea, but it's actually a bad idea because it locks us into scope. Again, we spent all this time in Scrum trying to be flexible on scope, but then we must meet acceptance criteria and suddenly we're locked into scope again. Yeah. Well, we are pretty close to time. This was a little bit different format because we only had a few people. We did a little bit of a different format where we basically just talked for an hour and a half with some help in the mural. So hopefully this was useful for you as well. If there's any feedback that you have, I would love to get it. Any outstanding questions, unanswered questions, because we can have other sessions. Not next week, the week after next, we have a session on daily Scrum that Anna is going to lead. I have seen some of the early workshop ideas, and it looks pretty good. So the idea is to hit some of the events in Scrum and how they would work. I think we did we do sprint planning or did we did sprint review? I think we did sprint review, didn't we? Yeah. We did sprint review before. So we're gonna hit. Yeah, you want planning on the list, Anna? Yeah, we can definitely put planning on the list to have a discussion around planning and how it might make it more effective. That's always the whole point of the Scrum Master is to help make everything more effective. Our working together, our delivery of software, make everything more effective. So I am very tired. I have spent 4 days this week, full days training from 9 till 5. So my brain is pretty much dead. Are there any questions before? Oh, EBM is on the list. And Nexus. Oh, yes. The elephant in the room, scaling. If you've been
me.
Yeah, if you've been following my LinkedIn, I think I've been pooping all over scaling frameworks recently, along with some other folks. But there are definitely things that we can do in scaling to help be more effective. So we could definitely have a scaling talk.
In fact, from what I saw today, Martin, and since you have so many exercises that we didn't do, maybe you can have the second workshop regarding story.
Ooh, well, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think it's just a waste if you don't use this exercise. I found they are very interesting. I mean, you might need to continue to do that, like people to join you, you know. So,
Yeah, some of them. Yeah, we got another. We got our visitor back. Some of them, like the circuit. I had an invest circuit. You kind of need at least 3 or 4 groups for that. So we really didn't have enough people. But we had lots of interesting conversations, which I think is, well, at least I think is still valuable. So what else did we put on the list? Sprint planning. Manage technical debt with Scrum. That's an interesting one.
In theory, it doesn't exist, but
So sure, but yeah.
I remember a workshop I heard you. I think it was organized by Boston, the Boston Agile community, which you talked. You talked.
Oh, yes, I did.
about that.
I did.
I'd like to know something more about that because I found your idea very interesting.
I don't even remember what I talked about. I don't even remember the topic, to be honest. But I remember doing it. What was the topic?
I think it was talking about the development in DevOps.
Oh, okay, yeah. What was it? Yeah, okay.
It was a couple of years ago, maybe.
I don't think it was that long ago. I think it just seems. I'm pretty sure it was this calendar year. Boston Agile Martin Angelwood. That'll probably not get it, but we'll see. Oh. Agile Boston. Ah, yes. I did the enterprise transformation that shows that you can too. That's what I did.
A complicated name.
It was in June this year. It was in June this year. Yeah, June this year. Lockdown means we have no idea about time anymore. It's just gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, not this year for sure. Last year, totally. So, I have.
It was June 2020.
No. 21. June 2021. I have it here.
No. I really?
Yeah, really.
Oh
I
my
just
God.
put the link to it in the. Here's the link to it on Agile Boston.
Yes.
I think it was this year, right? But anyway, I have copies of that same presentation that I've done on my YouTube channel. And I think there's 4 or 5 different versions because I've done it at a number of conferences around the world and they've recorded it. And I've also done it just online. But it's telling, for those that don't know, it's telling the Microsoft Azure DevOps story of how they transitioned to agility and all of the things that they had to consider and change. So I don't remember. I think I had an hour and a half for this one, so I had plenty of time. But sometimes people give me like half an hour for that. Half an hour is not enough for that talk. You get through about a quarter of the content. Yeah, so that's quite a good story. And yeah, if you have a specific thing from that story you want to do a workshop on, we can definitely do that. But there's a lot of things in it. To
go into details of some of the topics you introduced there because they're super interesting.
If you pick the topics, we can put them on the backlog.
The technical debt. How you manage the technical debt. I remember you talked about an overlap, not an overlap of screens, but a pool dedicated to the technical debt. But you didn't have the time to.
Yeah, we were. You're right, and it was less just technical debt, but it was the SRE. So site reliability engineering is a technique that was developed at Google. Originally developed at Google, but Microsoft have adopted it and changed it slightly for their world. But the way they do it was they had dedicated members of the team who were the site reliability development engineers. They had some crazy an acronym for it. But they effectively had a dual role of delivering from the SRE backlog, so the live site issues backlog, dealing with live site issues so that you protected the team so they could focus on value, and then that rotated through the team so that you didn't have one person annoyed at that. Yeah, that's I actually, Erica, if you look on my YouTube channel, I think I've got a talk just on that topic from that team.
Ah, perfect.
I'm
Okay,
pretty sure I've got one on my YouTube channel.
wonderful. Thank you.
If I don't, let me know and I can make you one.
Last question.
Yes.
Any advice how we should deal with received tickets from customers? Because for sure they will not have this structure of the user
Yep.
story. So that this means that each ticket should be reworked, or
So that is, I would probably not want tickets from customers going directly on my backlog. I, as a product owner, I'm going to look at those tickets, and because there's if that ticket goes directly on my backlog, there's an assumption that I'm doing it, and I might choose not to do it. Okay, there might be something that the customer says, I really need this to work this way, or I think you've delivered a broken product when in actual fact it's the way we built it is deliberately that way. Or they have a bug, but it only affects one customer. It's a big deal to fix. Maybe it's not worth our time and effort to fix, right? So I don't want to have that assumption, but I think having a place where I can see all of the user tickets and then break them down into things that go on my backlog, I'm pretty good with that. But I definitely don't want a one-to-one relationship, because one user ticket might turn into 5 backlog items, or it could be various things that it doesn't have to be a one-to-one relationship. Maybe, I don't know. What are you doing just now? One-to-one. And what about if they're really, really big?
because we have official system for receiving these tickets, we have to, because
Yep.
they're regulatory. But in Jira, we can split in different one and just relate them.
Well, yeah, that's okay. So the way I've seen, so Microsoft for a while used user voice, right? So not just tickets. So user voice was not for support tickets, but for I would like, right? The customer's desirements could go on user voice and everybody could vote on them, and then they would filter the ones that they wanted to do into the system. And they have a separate support ticket system that I think probably does the same. I mean, it ends up on somebody's list and then it's approved to go into the team's backlog. Yeah.
Yeah, because you're right, it also depends on the vision for the product. So not every requirement should be accepted.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
thanks, Yulong. Good to see you again.
I have to go. Yeah. See you next time. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye now.
So yeah, I agree. And if it's working for you and it doesn't get too overwhelming, then that's okay. But I can imagine if your product has a lot of users and you get a lot of tickets, it could be somewhat overwhelming having the tickets coming in like that.
Yeah, we have that.
Okay. Yeah.
The backlog is huge, so. But yeah, we'll see how we're gonna do.
Remember lean inventory control for your backlog, right? If you've got too many things on your product backlog, the product owner can't know everything. So if their accountability is maximizing the value, it can be very difficult to find it, right? Like a needle in a haystack, right? Where's the value? I don't know, because there's 5,000 things in the product backlog. So definitely apply some sort of lean inventory control, right? You want a minimum stuff in there, but just what you need. Maybe what you've got is what you have to have, right? But maybe it could be less, easier to understand, or Yeah, I don't like the idea of having 2 backlogs, but I also like the idea of having too many things in one backlog less. So maybe triage.
Triage, definitely.
Yeah, triage.
Because there might be some duplicates also.
Yep. And then it's hard once the duplicates get into your backlog because now it's polluted. Yeah. And trying to find them afterwards is a nightmare. Yeah. There's
Okay, thank
yeah.
you.
You're very welcome, Anna. Cool. So will we wrap it up there? And I get to go get some sleep. That would be good. So thank you very much for coming today. And next week it'll be more popular because Anna will be there, and we're gonna talk about the Daily Scrum. Not next week, the week after next. It's every 2 weeks. Brain. Yeah. Okay. So hopefully see you then.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
See you.